After Jesus had been crucified and raised from the grave, there were many questions that were being asked, not so much about his death, because people were aware that he died, that he had irritated the religious leaders, and they would not rest until they had seen him crucified. Hideous as it was, they were more concerned about this message of the resurrection. 500 people said that they had seen him walking about and that he was the risen Christ. Now this was what really raised questions, and they asked themselves, and finally it got to the place where St. Paul was asking it, what if Christ is raised? Paul asked it another way, what if he hadn't been raised? So we have this what-if business going on. What if? What if he is raised? What's he going to do in and around Jerusalem? Is it going to be worse than it was when he walked here as a great teacher and prophet, and many came to hear him? Now they would come to see him, a person who had been dead. What if he is alive? Another question they would ask is, what kind of a body did he have? What is our body going to be like if we're supposed to one day be raised too? These are really important questions. Does Jesus Christ's resurrection have any effect on our understanding of life and death today? What if Christ has not been raised? That's a question that I'd like to zero in on for a little while in our message today. You know, we have a lot of what-ifs, don't we? Let's just depart from the text for a minute and talk about life. What if? I remember as a young person, I often would get a gang of people in the car, and we'd drive up on the Eastern Promenade, which was right on Portland, Maine. It looked out to the Atlantic Ocean, and it was a beautiful place. The people who lived there were obviously very wealthy. They had their large homes. They had their beautiful cars. And if you were there at Christmas time, you would see how they lighted the houses. Long before we ever thought of doing that, at least in the Midwest, I think. But here they really decorated. You could see that it was a place where wealth had accumulated, where there was a lot of prestige socially and politically, and without a doubt, they lived in a little world all of their own. Now, my question was, what if? What if my father had been one of those millionaires? What if I'd had a nice car that I could drive to high school and everybody would sit and look at it? What if? What if? Now, on the other hand, just a short distance from there, you could drive to a place down by the wharf. This was looking out to the Atlantic Ocean too, but it was quite a different look. It was boats that had come in and fishermen who were there with their products and so forth and so on. Around it was what you would call, I imagine in vulgar language, the slum. These people lived in homes that had a lot to be desired. They were run down. The housing was crowded. There was crime there. You could read about it the next morning in the paper. If you rode through there at night, you just prayed that your car would not have a flat tire, because you wouldn't want to get out and change it right in those tough times. It was a different neighborhood. What if? What if that is where my father and mother had lived? Would I be a different person than I am today? What if I had come from a home where they never went to church? What if they didn't have a Bible in their home, or if they had one, it never was read? Would I be a different person? What if they didn't believe in education? What if my father had said, well, go through the 8th grade and then I'll get you a job in the factory somewhere? What if? You can go on. It can drive you mad. Sometimes you can really rejoice. Sometimes it's spooky. Sometimes you think it's out of this world. What if? What if? Now, it is that question that I want to deal with, because Paul deals with it in our text today, and he takes us to a far deeper level. What if? Jesus is either a dead martyr or he's a living Lord. What if, in the verse 20, I think if you're following in our text today, I'm in 1 Corinthians 15, and the Apostle Paul said, what if Christ had not been raised? What would it be like? Our preaching would be useless, and so would your faith. Just stop and think. What would a worship service be like if Jesus Christ had not been raised? Oh, I imagine you could have had a worship service. You could have gathered together a number of people who enjoyed being with one another. And we could actually have gone into the Sermon on the Mount and pick out some of the ethics that Jesus taught and develop a good sermon and perhaps something that we ought to hear and hear often. It doesn't do much to the resurrection, but you can talk about do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And you get some ideas as to how you ought to live, at least on Monday until noon. Or sometimes you would think, well, these people are living a little bit within themselves, and so maybe what we ought to have is a Good Samaritan story. And we learn that we need to take care of our neighbors, take care of them who are really hurting in one way or another. And that's a message that certainly needs to be told in that day, and it needs to be told today. But if that were the extent of it, what if? But you see, when you know that Jesus Christ has been raised, then you talk about the resurrection. Then you talk about the life after death. Then you talk about the forgiveness of sins. Your life is different because Christ has been raised. Did you ever go to a funeral where you could sense that people did not believe there was such a thing as a resurrection? It's a hideous thing. What do these people try to do? Well, they eulogize. And they talk about this lady, what a great woman she was, what a great grandma she was, what a great neighbor she was, what a great quilter she was, and all these greats. And it's fine, it's nice. I think a little eulogy has a place in the funeral. We want to know who's being buried. But more than that, it is pretty meaningless. And that's the kind of a funeral you would have to have if Jesus had not been raised. But if he has been raised, and he has, but if he has been raised, then you talk about, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And as to whosoever believes in me shall never die. Our preaching would be quite different. Our witnessing would be quite different. You know, we could go around and talk about all the nice things that we ought to do and how you can get over some of your problems. And Paul deals with this too. He says not only what would our preaching be, it would be worthless, but our witness would be found lacking. More than that, we are then found to be false witnesses about God. We're running around talking about something that there is not. There have been many a time that my witness would have fallen flat on its face if I could not point it to a living Christ. Let me give you a picture. Here is a young lady who is an addict. She drinks, and the children are right near her side. I've been there, people. This is not a story. Many have come in and scolded her, told her to get a hold of herself, see all that she had to live for, and then they depart. And that woman, coming out of her drunken stupor, would say to me, oh, how cruel can people be. There's nothing that I want to get rid of any more than that bottle. But I simply cannot do it. Now, what if Christ had not been raised? Then I would have said, well, let's try to see if we can't do something about this. Maybe I can help you. Maybe there is something down deep in that beautiful head of yours that would give you the courage to keep on going. But I didn't. I said to her, you are absolutely helpless. I can't help you as a person, but I can help you by leading you to someone who can.